In the forgotten county lot, a mechanic-turned-salvager was about to unlock a condemned grain silo he'd bought for pocket change. What started as a routine scrap metal run took a shocking turn when he came face to face with lead-lined chambers hiding a century of death. Owen Mercer wasn't your typical junk picker. For 15 years, he had spent his life fixing combines and resurrecting farm equipment, known for seeing value in what others had written off as worthless. When he encountered mason jars filled with jet-black wheat and a leather ledger coded with the names of the dead, he had no idea he was walking into a conspiracy that had crushed generations of farmers. Owen made a choice that would lead to arrests, exposures, and the dismantling of an agricultural empire built on poisoned grain and rigged explosions. What began as a 20-cent gamble on scrap metal would become a reckoning with systematic theft disguised as fate. The farming community would never be the same after one man refused to let buried evidence stay buried. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The auctioneer's hammer fell with barely a sound. 20 cents. That's all it took to buy a condemned grain silo that had sat empty for 3 decades. Owen Mercer stood alone in the weedy lot, holding a rusted padlock key that might not even work anymore. The structure looked cursed. Sheet metal buckled and stained with rust, concrete foundation cracked like sun-baked earth, the catwalk sagging under its own weight. Most folks had whispered warnings about the place, said it brought nothing but trouble to anyone who got too close, but Owen saw something else. He ran his calloused fingers along the corrugated steel and felt deep dents hammered into the surface. Not random damage from weather or time. These marks formed deliberate patterns, concentrated around access panels, as if someone had tried to break in, or maybe break out. County Inspector Ruth Voss appeared beside him with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Professional pressed slacks, hair pulled back tight enough to look painful. She offered to fast-track demolition paperwork, no charge. Just sign here, and a crew could have it flattened by Friday. Make the whole mess go away. Owen thanked her politely and said he'd think about it. The way her smile tightened told him everything he needed to know. She wanted this silo gone, and she wanted it gone fast. As dusk settled over the lot, Owen returned alone. The padlock resisted, corroded by decades of rain, but finally surrendered to penetrating oil and persistence. The access door groaned open on hinges that hadn't moved since before Owen was born. Inside, the air felt different, dry, strangely warm, as if the thick walls provided insulation against the outside world. He clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. The main storage chamber rose 30 feet overhead, a cylinder of shadows and dust motes. But something felt wrong about the proportions. The interior diameter looked smaller than the exterior measurements suggested. Owen paced the perimeter, counting steps, doing rough calculations in his head. 6 feet of wall space unaccounted for. That's when he heard it. A low hum, almost subsonic, vibrating through the steel framework. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling like breath. Owen's scalp prickled. Locals claimed the silo was haunted, said it screamed before accidents happened. But this wasn't a scream. This was machinery, or something alive. The flashlight beam caught a ladder bolted to the wall, leading up to the headhouse where the grain distributor once sat. Owen climbed slowly, testing each rung before trusting it with his full weight. The metal groaned but held. At the top, he found an inspection hatch sealed with a padlock newer than the structure itself. Not decades old. Maybe 5 years, if that. The lock snapped under bolt cutters. Owen lifted the hatch and aimed his light into the cavity beyond. Lead sheeting lined the inner walls. Heavy grey panels riveted in place with industrial fasteners. In the center stood a metal rack holding dozens of mason jars, each one filled with wheat kernels so dark they looked black. Paper labels, yellowed but legible, marked each jar with neat handwriting. Lot S13. Dates ranging from 1927 to 1974. Beside the jars lay a leather-bound ledger thick as a phone book. Owen opened it carefully, the spine cracking with age. Page after page of entries, coded with initials, dates, and sequences of numbers. Some looked like ticket stubs. Others matched railcar markings. At the bottom of random pages, single words appeared. Delivered, stored, accident, seized. A sharp cry echoed from somewhere overhead. Owen jerked the flashlight up, just as pale wings flashed through the beam. A barn owl, massive and silent except for that single outburst, settled onto a crossbeam. Its amber eyes fixed on Owen with an intensity that felt almost human. Protective, the locals called it Hush, claimed it nested here for generations, cried out before something terrible happened. Owen pocketed one jar of the black wheat and the ledger, his hands shaking slightly. The owl watched him descend, its head swiveling to track his movement. When Owen reached the ground and turned back for one last look, he noticed something he'd missed before. Fresh scratches around the power junction box. Clean copper where wire had been cut, not corroded. Someone had deliberately severed the electrical supply, then made it look like age and neglect. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose panels. Owen locked the access door behind him and walked to his truck, the jar cold against his ribs where he tucked it into his jacket. He knew exactly one person who could tell him what he'd found. And if the black wheat was what he suspected, this 20-cent silo had just become the most expensive thing he'd ever owned. Dr. Priya Nayar's lab occupied a converted storage room behind the farmers' co-op, crammed with second-hand equipment and jury-rigged ventilation. She worked cheap, sometimes free, testing samples other labs wouldn't touch. Suspicious seed, questionable soil, evidence that might implicate someone powerful. Her parents had run a small milling operation until consolidation crushed them. She'd learned early that science could speak truth when lawyers wouldn't. She examined the jar Owen had brought, holding it up to the light. The wheat kernels looked wrong even to his untrained eye. Swollen, discolored. Priya unscrewed the lid carefully. Her movements precise, and immediately resealed it. "Don't open any more of these without proper PPE," she said flatly. "That's ergot." See those dark purple structures? Fungal sclerosia. They produce alkaloids that cause convulsions, gangrene, psychosis. Medieval peasants called it St. Anthony's fire. One contaminated batch in a grain shipment could kill livestock, make people violently ill, and render the entire lot unsellable. Owen felt the temperature drop in his gut. How unsellable? Condemned, destroyed, insurance. Won't cover it because it's considered negligence. Priya pulled out a battered almanac and a folder of photocopied coroner reports she'd collected over years of quiet research. She laid them side by side with the ledger Owen had brought. Look at the dates. Every entry in your ledger that ends with accident or seized corresponds to a silo incident. Grain deemed spoiled, structural failure, mysterious fires. And within 6 months of each incident, the land changed hands. Always to the same buyer, Stroud Ag and Loan, Owen said quietly. 3 generations of them. Priya flipped through the ledger, her finger tracing patterns. These aren't just random codes. See this number? That's an elevator ticket format from the 1940s. This sequence matches rail car identification systems. And these dates, they align with harvest windows. Rainfall totals. Someone kept meticulous records of deliveries, storage assignments and outcomes. A knock on the lab door made them both flinch. Malin entered, the co-op's manager, carrying a ring binder thick with printouts. She was small, efficient, and ran the operation on margins so thin they barely existed. "I heard what you were looking into," she said without preamble. "We keep throughput logs going back 40 years. Digital now, but the old ones are on microfiche in the basement. I pulled everything I could find." She spread the pages across Priya's workbench. Delivery receipts, inspection stamps, storage assignments. Her finger tapped a recurring notation. Every month, we'd get a shipment coded as special handling Stroud account. Never went through normal channels. Always delivered. After hours. Always to specific bins. And look, the bin numbers match locations that later had problems. Owen felt pieces clicking together, the shape of something massive and deliberate emerging from decades of dust. If this ledger is real, it's not just history. It's a map of theft. Priya nodded slowly. Engineered accidents, poisoned grain, legal seizures disguised as acts of God. But proving it means finding people who remember, who lost family or land and never understood why. She met Owen's eyes. You'd need to talk to Celia Reyes. If anyone kept records the way this ledger suggests, it's her. Celia Reyes lived in a wind-worn farmhouse at the end of a gravel road. Surrounded by alfalfa fields, she tended alone. Widowed 20 years, sharp as the day she'd buried her husband, she kept her memories in shoeboxes stacked in a spare bedroom. When Owen explained what he'd found, she disappeared into that room and emerged with an armload of cardboard, each box labelled in faded marker. Seed tags, court letters, funeral programs, receipts tied with string. My father lost his wheat farm in '74, she said, settling into a kitchen chair that had supported generations of difficult conversations. Silo blast. They said a pressure valve failed, but Dad swore someone tampered with the screamer. The screamer? Owen asked. Pressure relief valve. It whistled for hours before it blew. Everyone in 3 counties could hear it when grain shifted wrong or moisture built up. Dad's screamer went silent 2 days before the explosion. Silent, then boom! They condemned the whole structure, said the grain was contaminated with something. Insurance wouldn't pay. Bank called the note. Within a year, Stroud owned it. She pulled out a yellowed map and spread it across the table, marked with red X's and careful annotations. I've been tracking this for 50 years. Every X is a silo that failed. Look at the pattern. They circle Stroud acquisitions like a noose. Owen opened the ledger to a page from 1974. There, in neat handwriting, he found initials that matched Celia's father's name. The entry ended with a single word. Seized. Celia's hands trembled slightly as she sorted through another box, pulling out legal documents. See these notary stamps? Same person witnessed every deed transfer. Stroud's grandfather's lawyer. Same signature, same date formats, going back to the 20s. It's not coincidence. It's system. She handed Owen a photograph, creased and faded. Young farmers standing in front of a gleaming new silo, proud and hopeful. Her father stood second from the left, his arm around a partner Owen didn't recognize. That man died in the blast. They said he was inside when it happened, checking moisture levels. But Dad always said he'd gone home early that day. Someone called him back with a fake emergency. Priya examined the documents with growing intensity, cross-referencing dates with the ledger. 3 confirmed deaths, dozens of injuries, hundreds of acres seized. And every single incident benefited the same family. They don't sue first, Celia said quietly. They scare first. They make you think it's your fault, your bad luck, God's will. Then they show up with sympathy and a buyout offer, and you're so broken you take it. My father died believing he'd failed us. He never knew he'd been targeted. Owen felt rage building in his chest, hot and familiar. His own father had lost their acreage to a predatory loan, died thinking he'd let the family down. The machinery was the same, only the methods had evolved. We need to document everything, Priya said. Chain of custody for the jars, the ledger, these records. If we're going to expose this, we need evidence that can't be dismissed or destroyed. Celia pulled out one more document, a current property map. Stroud Ag and Loan now owns or holds liens on 60% of the arable land in this county. They control the seed supply, the storage facilities, and the credit lines. If you come after them with this, they'll come after you with everything. Owen stood, the weight of the ledger heavy in his hands. Then we'd better move fast. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the alfalfa fields gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a barn owl cried out, sharp and clear in the evening air. Owen thought of the silo, standing alone in its weedy lot, holding secrets that had been buried for nearly a century. He thought of his father, and Celia's father, and all the people who'd lost everything to a system designed to look like fate. He'd bought that silo for 20 cents. But the real price, he was beginning to understand, was going to be much higher. Owen returned to the silo the next morning to find it wrapped in red tape, literally. Emergency condemnation notices plastered every access point. Signed by Ruth Voss and dated the previous evening. Imminent structural hazard. Unauthorized entry prohibited. Demolition scheduled within 72 hours. He was still staring at the notices when his phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Mercer? Caleb Stroud. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. The voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of pleasant that set Owen's teeth on edge. I heard about the inspector's findings. Terrible situation. I wanted to reach out personally, neighbor to neighbor, and see if we might help each other out. Owen said nothing. Silence was the best tool he'd learned in years of dealing with people who wanted something. I know the county can be difficult about these old structures, Caleb continued. Liability concerns, environmental cleanup, all that red tape. What if I took the whole problem off your hands? Fair market value for the scrap metal, plus a little extra for your trouble. Say $5,000. We'd handle all the disposal costs, the paperwork, everything. You walk away clean, and that eyesore gets properly dealt with. Not interested, Owen said, a pause. The kind that lasted just a beat too long. I understand you're a man who likes to do things himself. I respect that. But sometimes the smart play is knowing when to let professionals handle the heavy lifting. That silo's been nothing but bad luck for everyone who's touched it. Why take chances? I said no. Well, the warmth drained from Caleb's voice like water from cracked earth. I hope you got good insurance, Mr. Mercer. These old structures, they have a way of becoming expensive liabilities. Think about my offer. It stands for 48 hours. The line went dead. Owen looked back at the silo, then down at the power junction box he'd noticed the night before. He knelt beside it and examined the cuts more carefully. Whoever had done this knew exactly which wires to sever. The work was too clean to be vandalism, too precise to be accident. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, and Deputy Jalen Pike stepped out. He was young, quiet, with the kind of steady presence that came from seeing bad things and staying decent anyway. Former Army EOD, someone had told Owen once. Came home to keep his sister safe. Got a minute? Mike asked. Owen stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Depends on what you're here to say. Off the record. Pike glanced around, making sure they were alone. Document everything. Photographs, timestamps, witnesses. Keep copies in multiple locations. And if you're going to keep poking around this thing, wear a camera. The kind that uploads to cloud storage in real time. You think, something's going to happen. I think Ruth Voss doesn't file emergency condemnations on structures that have been standing empty for 30 years unless someone tells her to. And I think electrical systems don't cut themselves. Pike handed Owen a card with a number written on the back. That's my cell, not the department line. You see anything hinky, you call me direct. After Pike left, Owen spent 2 hours installing battery-powered LED lights inside the silo, positioning them to eliminate shadows. He changed the padlocks on both access doors using heavy-duty models that couldn't be picked or cut quietly. Then he set up trail cameras, cheap hunting models from the farm supply store, angled to cover the catwalk and the main entry points. The sun was setting when he finished. Owen stood in the doorway, looking up at the damaged structure, at the buckled metal and the shadows gathering in the corners. Somewhere above, Hush called out, that sharp cry that made locals cross themselves. Owen had stopped believing in ghosts years ago, but he was starting to believe in haunted ground, in places where enough bad things had happened that the earth itself remembered. He locked the door and headed home, not noticing the pickup truck that followed him at a careful distance, or the way its headlights cut out 2 blocks before his street. The trail camera alert hit Owen's phone at 11:47. Motion detected. He pulled up the live feed and watched 2 figures climb the exterior ladder to the catwalk, their faces hidden by the brims of their caps. They moved with purpose, not the random wandering of kids looking for trouble. Owen was in his truck and driving before he'd consciously decided to go. No lights. He knew these roads well enough to navigate by starlight and memory. The silo rose against the night sky like a broken tooth, darker than the darkness around it. He parked 100 yards away and approached on foot, his phone already recording. Above, metal creaked as the figures moved along the catwalk. Owen could hear their voices now, low and urgent. Just loosen these 3 bolts. Make it look like rust failure. What about the fuel? Leave it near the leg motor. Inspectors will think it's old equipment residue. Owen recognized the first voice. Hank Dole did odd jobs around the county, had a reputation for taking shortcuts and holding grudges. The kind of man who'd cut corners for cash and sleep fine afterward. A sudden flutter of wings broke the quiet. Hush erupted from the headhouse, pale feathers catching what little light existed. The owl dove past the intruders, close enough to make them duck. Hank swore and dropped his flashlight. The beam tumbled through the air, hit the catwalk railing, and bounced at an angle that illuminated something Owen had missed before. Heat shimmer. Rising from a seam in the metal paneling below the grain distributor housing, the 2 men scrambled down the ladder and disappeared into the darkness, spooked by the owl's aggression. Owen waited until their vehicle sounds faded completely before he moved. He climbed carefully, testing each rung, keeping his phone camera pointed ahead. The heat shimmer led him to a section of paneling held in place by bolts that looked original but weren't. The metal was newer, the paint a slightly different shade. Owen used his multi-tool to remove the bolts, working slowly in the dim light of his phone. Behind the panel lay another cavity, smaller than the lead-lined chamber he'd found before. This one was insulated, temperature-controlled by a system that ran on its own battery backup. Inside, vacuum-sealed packets of seed, grey and unremarkable, each one stamped with a code. Sterile 9. Below the packets, an invoice stub on Stroud Agritech letterhead. Delivery date 6 months ago. Owen photographed everything, then replaced the panel exactly as he'd found it. His hands shook slightly as he descended. This wasn't history anymore. This was present tense, active. Whatever Stroud was hiding, they were still using the silo for it. He texted Priya from his truck, keeping the message vague. "There's a second cache. Need you to test something new." Her reply came back within seconds. "Meet me at the lab, now." Priya's lab smelled like coffee and bleach when Owen arrived at 2 in the morning. She already had equipment warming up, Petri dishes prepared, sterile tools laid out like a surgeon's array. He handed her one of the sterile 9 packets, still sealed. "I need to know what this does," Owen said, "and I need proof that will hold up in court." She examined the packet, turning it over in the light. "This labeling format is not standard commercial seed. Where did you find it?" "Hidden in the silo. Temperature-controlled storage. Recent installation." Owen pulled up the invoice photo on his phone. "Delivered 6 months ago by a Stroud subsidiary." Priya cut the packet open with surgical precision and extracted several seeds. Under magnification, they looked normal. Hybrid corn, probably. She prepared multiple petri dishes, each one containing a different growth medium. In half the dishes, she planted regular seed from the co-op stock. In the other half, sterile 9, "We wait," she said. "But not long. If this is what I think it is, we'll see results in 48 hours. While the cultures incubated, Priya returned to the S13 samples, running tests she'd been conducting for days. She showed Owen slides under the microscope, pointing out the fungal structures, the alkaloid concentrations, the perfect conditions for contamination. Then she pulled out the old coroner reports and laid them beside her notes. The symptoms match perfectly. Convulsion, gangrene, psychosis. But here's what's interesting. She tapped one report. This man died 3 days after the silo explosion. The official cause was listed as complications from blast injuries, but look at these notes. Blackened extremities, severe cramping, hallucinations. That's not trauma. That's ergot poisoning. They used the contaminated grain to make people sick, Owen said slowly, then blamed the sickness on the explosion and condemned the entire facility as a biohazard, which meant no one could inspect it closely, no one could dispute the insurance claims, and the land went up for quick sale. Priya's voice was flat, clinical, but her hands gripped the edge of the workbench hard enough to whiten her knuckles. It's brilliant in a horrifying way. Self-reinforcing disaster. A knock on the lab door made them both turn. May entered. followed by a skinny kid in his early 20s wearing a hoodie that advertised a coding boot camp. Theo Walker, the co-op's part-time scale operator and full-time tech enthusiast. May said you needed help with the ledger, Theo said, practically vibrating with excitement. I'm pretty good with ciphers and old data systems. Owen handed him the ledger, watching as Theo's eyes went wide. The kid flipped through pages, his fingers tracing the coded entries, muttering to himself. After 10 minutes of silence, he looked up with a grin. It's not encrypted, just formatted. See these numbers? Elevator ticket sequences from old punch card systems. These codes are railcar IDs, standardized by the ICC in the 30s. And these dates, they're not just calendar days. They include rainfall totals pulled from agricultural almanacs. He pulled out his laptop and started typing. Give me a few hours and I can decode the whole thing. Match it to historical records, weather data, land transactions. Can you prove it's authentic? Owen asked. In a way that stands up to legal challenge? I can show the mathematical patterns, the consistency of the coding system across decades, the correlations to documented events. Theo was already deep into the work, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Yeah, I can prove it. May spread out her throughput logs beside Theo's workspace. I went back further, found records from the 60s and 70s on microfiche in the county clerk's basement. Every single special handling delivery matches a ledger entry, every single one. Deputy Pike arrived just before dawn, technically off duty, but wearing his uniform anyway. I got that body cam footage preserved, he said to Owen. Time-stamped, encrypted, backed up 3 ways. Your visitors last night. Hank Dole and Marcus Webb. Webb's got a record for insurance fraud. Dole's got unpaid fines that keep mysteriously disappearing when he does favors for certain people. Can you arrest them? Owen asked. Not yet. Right now I've got trespassing at best. But if they come back, if they actually try whatever they were setting up, Pike tapped his camera. Then I've got sabotage, attempted arson, criminal conspiracy, and that opens doors to warrants. Priya checked her petri dishes and went very still. Owen, look at this. The dishes with regular seed showed healthy bacterial colonies, the kind of soil microbes essential for plant growth. The dishes with sterile 9 seed were nearly barren. The seed had germinated, but the soil around it looked dead. It's a Terminator variant, Priya said quietly. Not just for the plant itself, but for the entire soil ecosystem. This seed produces something that kills beneficial microbes. Over a growing season, it would collapse the soil biome. Farmers couldn't save seed, couldn't rotate crops, couldn't even sell their land to anyone who wanted to farm it. They'd be locked into buying new seed every year from the only supplier who has the treatment protocol. Stroud, Owen said. Stroud, Priya confirmed. This isn't just a smoking gun. It's a loaded weapon pointed at every independent farmer in the region. The morning light was creeping through the lab windows when Theo finally looked up from his laptop, triumph written across his face. Got it, full decode. And Owen, if the farms that got seized after accidents are now owned by shell companies that trace back to Stroud Ag and Loan, the pattern isn't just clear, it's prosecutable. Owen looked around at the assembled evidence. The contaminated grain that had been used as a weapon for decades. The modern seed designed to trap farmers into permanent dependence. The ledger that mapped out a century of systematic theft. The photographs, the logs, the test results, the decoded data. We need to go public, he said. Fast, before they shut us down. But we need to do it right. Chain of custody, witness testimony, everything documented and redundant. May pulled out her phone. I know someone who can help with that. Pastoralita Monroe. She's been mediating land disputes for 20 years. If anyone can organize a community forum that can't be ignored or suppressed, it's her. Pike nodded slowly. Get your evidence organized. I'll make sure the right people in the state attorney's office know something's coming. But Owen, you need to understand. The moment you go public, Stroud will throw everything at you. Legal threats, smear campaigns, maybe worse. Owen thought about his father, dying with shame he didn't deserve. He thought about Celia's father, and all the people who'd lost everything to a system designed to look like fate. He thought about the farmers who'd plant Sterile 9 without knowing what it would do to their land. Then, we'd better make sure we get it right the first time, he said. Above the co-op building, dawn broke over the fields, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a barn owl called out one last time before settling in to roost, its work for the night complete. The church hall smelled like old hymnals and floor wax. Pastor Lita Monroe stood at the entrance, counting heads as people filed through the double doors. She'd placed folding chairs in neat rows, left the aisle wide, and taped down every cord that crossed the floor. Nothing would give Ruth Voss an excuse to shut them down on safety grounds. Owen stood near the makeshift stage, a card table covered with a white sheet. His hands wouldn't stop moving. He straightened the stack of printed logs, adjusted the laptop, checked the projector connection for the third time in 5 minutes. Lita walked over and placed one steady hand on his shoulder. Her voice came low and even. "You're going to speak like you're explaining an engine to someone who's never held a wrench. No anger, no accusations. Just facts they can see for themselves." Owen nodded, throat tight. He'd rehearsed in his truck on the way over, stumbling through the words until they felt less like a speech and more like a conversation. But that was before he'd seen the room filling up. Faces he recognized from the grain elevator. Neighbors who'd waved from their combines during harvest. People who'd lost land the same way his father had. Celia Reyes sat in the front row, a cardboard box at her feet. She caught his eye and gave a single sharp nod. Her presence steadied him more than any rehearsal could. Dr. Priya Nayar arrived with 2 plastic trays covered in plastic wrap. She set them on the evidence table with the same care she'd used for nitroglycerin. One tray showed rich, dark soil crawling with visible life, tiny shoots pushing through the surface. The other looked grey and dead. The soil cracked like drought-damaged clay. "This is what Sterile 9 does," she'd explained that morning in the lab. "The seeds germinate fine at first, but they release compounds that collapse the microbial network. After 1 season, the soil can't support anything, not even weeds, unless you buy their proprietary amendments. It's a trap with a biological lock." Mei Lin slipped in through the side door, nodded to Owen, and took a seat near the back where she could watch the exits. Theo Walker sat beside her, laptop open, 3 phone cameras propped on the windowsill, all streaming to backup servers he'd set up in his garage. If anyone tried to kill the power or pull the plug, the story would already be live. Deputy Jalen Pike stood just inside the entrance, uniform pressed, body cam clipped and recording. He caught Owen's glance and tapped the camera once. The message was clear. Everything tonight would be documented. The room filled. 60 people, then 70. Some stood along the walls when the chairs ran out. Owen saw farmers in clean Carhartt jackets, women with weathered hands folded in their laps. A few teenagers dragged along by parents who wanted them to understand what was at stake. Ruth Voss appeared in the doorway at 7 sharp. She wore a county blazer and carried a clipboard like a shield. Her eyes swept the room, calculating, and landed on the evidence table with visible displeasure. She walked straight to Lita. "Pastor Monroe, I'm not sure this gathering has the proper permits." "Assembly of this size requires..." Lita smiled, warm as Sunday morning. "Fire marshal signed off this afternoon. Occupancy limit is 112. We're well within code. Would you like a chair, Ms. Voss?" Voss's jaw tightened, but she moved to the side without another word. Owen noticed she stayed near the door. Lita stepped to the front and raised one hand. The murmur of conversation died immediately. "We're here tonight because one of our own found something that belongs to all of us. History, evidence, truth. We're going to hear it plain. Ask our questions respectful and leave here knowing more than when we walked in." "Owen Mercer, the floor is yours." Owen stood. His legs felt steadier than he'd expected. He walked to the card table, picked up the first printed log, and began. 20 cents. That's what I paid for the old Morrison silo at the county sale. I wanted scrap. What I found was a crime scene. He held up a mason jar, the black grain inside visible even from the back row. This is Lot S13, ergot-contaminated wheat. Dr. Nair can explain what that means, but here's the short version. 100 years ago, if your grain tested dirty, you couldn't sell it. Your contract was void. Your loan came due. And Stroud's grandfather was right there with an offer to buy your land for pennies on the dollar. He set the jar down and picked up the ledger, pages flagged with sticky notes. This ledger matches elevator ticket numbers to rainfall dates to families who lost their farms after, quote, silo accidents or spoiled grain claims. Celia Reyes's father is in here. So are 8 other names you'll recognize. Celia stood without prompting. She pulled a folded paper from her box, old and creased from years in storage. This is the condemnation notice my parents received in 1974, 3 days after a dust explosion that killed my uncle. The grain tested contaminated. The insurance wouldn't pay. Stroud Ag and Loan foreclosed within the month. We'd lost 200 acres. Her voice didn't waver. My father always said the screamer valve had been whistling for days before the blast. Someone tampered with it. He just couldn't prove it, murmurs rippled through the room. Owen saw heads turning, people leaning toward each other, whispering names and dates. Priya stepped forward. She uncovered the 2 soil trays and set them side by side under the projector's light. This is what I can prove in a lab. On the left, soil treated with standard hybrid seed. Healthy microbial activity, normal germination. On the right, soil exposed to sterile 9, the seed variety found in the hidden cache at Owen's silo. Notice the difference. This isn't just poor soil. This is biological sterilization. Farmers who plant this seed will find their soil dead within 2 seasons. They'll have no choice but to buy Stroud's amendments, Stroud's equipment leases, Stroud's next-generation seed. It's not farming. It's indentured servitude with a patent. The room went silent. Owen saw the understanding spread like a shadow. These were people who lived and died by their soil. The idea of deliberately poisoning it hit harder than any legal argument could. May stood next. She held up a 3-ring binder. I manage intake at the co-op. These are our logs. They match the ledger codes exactly. Elevator ticket numbers, rail car IDs, delivery dates. Every entry lines up with a seizure or a blast. It's not coincidence. It's a system. Theo pulled up the drone footage on the projector. The screen filled with a grainy aerial shot of a Stroud employee at a different condemned silo, staging a dust plume near the leg motor, placing a fuel can, glancing over his shoulder. This was filmed 3 days ago. They're planning to do the same thing to Owen's silo. Make it look like an accident. Destroy the evidence. Erase the pattern. Ruth Voss stood abruptly. This is speculation and conspiracy theory. You're showing edited footage and making wild accusations based on old paperwork that could mean anything. The county has a responsibility to remove hazardous structures, and that silo is... The lights went out. For 3 seconds, the room plunged into complete darkness. Then Theo's battery backups kicked in. The projector glowed back to life. The phone cameras kept recording. Lita's voice cut through the confusion. Everyone stay seated. We're fine. Voss was already moving toward the door. Pike stepped into her path, polite but immovable. Ma'am, I'd appreciate it if you stayed until we're finished here. Her face went pale, then red. But she stayed. Owen's phone buzzed. A text from Pike's partner parked outside. Gas main incident notice just posted for this block. Evacuation order fake signature. They're trying to clear us out. He held up the phone so Lita could see. She read it, nodded once, and turned to the crowd. Folks, there's been a bit of confusion with the county tonight. Some paperwork that doesn't quite match reality. Rather than argue about permits and protocols, I suggest we relocate. The silo is open ground, well lit, and happens to be exactly where the evidence sits. Anyone opposed to a field trip? No one moved to leave. Instead, they stood as one body, chairs scraping, murmurs turning to something harder. Resolve. Celia picked up her box. Priya grabbed the soil trays. May tucked the binder under her arm. Theo unplugged the laptop and scooped up the phones. Streams still running. Owen lifted the mason jar carefully, the black grain shifting inside like a threat that had waited a century to be named. They walked out into the night, 70 people moving through the streets in a quiet procession. The silo rose ahead of them against the stars. Blood lamps rigged by Owen earlier that week, casting harsh light across the buckled metal. Ruth Voss followed at a distance. Phone pressed to her ear, her voice too low to hear. But Owen didn't need to hear the words. He knew exactly who she was calling. The crowd gathered in a loose semicircle around the silo, gravel crunching underfoot, breath misting in the cold air. Owen's flood lamps turned the rusted cylinder into a stage, every dent and buckle visible, every weld line casting long shadows across the ground. The headhouse loomed above, dark except for one pale shape moving behind the broken slats. Hush, the barn owl settling back into her roost. Lita positioned herself at the center, near the base of the catwalk ladder. We're on open ground now. No permits, no paperwork, no one to tell us we can't listen to our own history. Owen, show us what you found. Owen climbed the first few rungs of the ladder, high enough to unlatch the main inspection hatch. It swung open with a metallic groan. He aimed his flashlight inside, and the beam caught the edge of the lead-lined inner bin, dull and cold. This is where they hid it. The S-13 jars were in here, sealed tight. But there's more. He descended and moved to a panel near the leg motor, bolts loosened from his earlier work. With Theo's help, he pried it open. Behind the sheet metal sat the hidden cavity. Vacuum-sealed packets of Sterile 9 stacked in neat rows and tucked behind them. A single invoice stub on Stroud's subsidiary letterhead. Priya stepped forward with the soil trays, setting them on an overturned crate where everyone could see. She spoke without notes, her voice carrying across the open space. S-13 is ergot-infected wheat. In the gut, ergot alkaloids cause convulsions, gangrene, death. But in a grain elevator, it's leverage. Contaminated grain voids contracts. It triggers insurance clauses. It creates legal ground to seize collateral, meaning your land. Lot S-13 wasn't an accident. It was a tool. She gestured to the grey, dead soil in the second tray. Sterile 9 is newer, more elegant. It doesn't kill you. It kills your autonomy. Farmers plant it thinking they're getting a hybrid edge. By the second season, their soil is biologically inert. They can't rotate crops. They can't save seed. They can't even sell to anyone outside Stroud's pipeline, because only Stroud's amendments will make the ground viable again. It's a genetic trap disguised as innovation. May held up the co-op logs, pages flagged in red. Every coded entry in the old ledger matches a delivery I can trace. Rail car numbers, moisture readings, dates. They line up with foreclosures, with explosions, with deaths. Stroud's people have been running this play for 4 generations. A voice rose from the crowd, shaky but loud. My grandfather died in a silo fire in '68. They said it was dust ignition. Are you telling me it was murder? Celia turned to face the speaker, an older man with a worn cap pulled low. I'm telling you what I know. The screamer valves were tampered with. The grain was spiked. The inspections were delayed until after the pressure built. And every single time, Stroud walked away with land, movement on the catwalk. Owen's eyes snapped upward. A figure crouched near the top, silhouetted against the flood lamps, one hand fumbling with something low and metallic. Hank Dole. He bent forward, shoulders hunched, a lighter flaring in his palm. Deputy Pike was already moving. He crossed the gravel in long strides, body cam recording every step, and hit the ladder at a run. His voice carried cold and clear. Hank Dole, this is Deputy Pike. Do not light that fuse. Put the lighter down and step back, Dole froze, head jerking toward the voice. For a moment he looked like he might bolt. Then his hand moved toward his pocket. Pike reached the catwalk platform, breathing hard but steady. Hands where I can see them. Now, Dole straightened slowly, lighter still clutched in one fist. Below, Theo's drone buzzed upward, camera lens zooming tight on the scene. Accelerant gleamed wet along the catwalk rail. A fuel can sat wedged against the motor housing. Pliers and a cut wire dangled from Dole's belt. Pike's body cam caught it all. Every tool, every stain, every second of hesitation before Dole finally opened his hand and let the lighter drop. It clattered against the metal grating, flame extinguished. Hank Dole, You're under arrest for attempted arson and criminal sabotage. You have the right to remain silent." Pike's voice stayed level as he cuffed Dole's wrists behind his back. Reading rights by rote, while the drone hovered and the crowd below watched in stunned silence, Theo's laptop chirped. 3 separate streams, all live, all recording. The footage was already archived, already distributed, already beyond anyone's ability to erase. Owen unlocked the hidden bin's outer panel with witnesses pressing close. He reached inside and pulled out one of the sterile 9 packets, vacuum-sealed and pristine. He held it up to the light so everyone could read the label. Stroud Agrigent LLC, patent pending, restricted distribution. Priya took the packet carefully, bagged it with gloved hands, and logged it in a chain of custody form she'd prepared that morning. May countersigned. Celia witnessed. Pike stepped down from the catwalk, Dole in cuffs ahead of him, and added his badge number to the form. The crowd pressed closer now, murmurs turning to questions, questions turning to anger. But Lita raised both hands, and her voice cut through like a bell. "We've got proof now. Real proof. Recorded, documented, witnessed. But anger without direction just burns itself out. We need to take this to every county board, every state rep, every journalist who'll listen. We need to name names and demand accountability. Not vengeance, justice." Owen looked around at the faces in the floodlight. Farmers who'd lost land, families who'd lost people. A century of quiet theft laid bare in a single night. He felt his father's ghost standing beside him, the weight of that old foreclosure finally given a name and a shape. Ruth Voss stood at the edge of the crowd, pale and rigid. She didn't try to leave. She didn't try to speak. She just watched as her carefully managed procedures collapsed under the weight of a body cam and a barn owl's inadvertent guidance. Pike loaded Dole into the cruiser, body cam still recording. Before he shut the door, Dole muttered something low and bitter. Pike leaned closer, listened, then straightened and walked back to the group. He pulled Owen aside. He says Ruth Voss hired him. Says he's got texts and bank transfers. He'll talk if we cut a deal. Owen nodded slowly. The noose was tightening, but there was still one more knot to untie. The Growers Association Gala was held in the event hall at the edge of town, the kind of place with vaulted ceilings and too much chrome. Banners hung from the rafters. Stroud Ag and Loan, proud sponsor. A glossy video played on loop across 3 massive screens, golden wheat fields swaying in slow motion, smiling farmers shaking hands with men in suits. Caleb Stroud stood near the bar, glass of bourbon in hand, working the room with practiced ease. He had his grandfather's build, tall and solid, and his father's smile, wide and empty. People gravitated toward him the way they always did, drawn by money and the promise of favorable loan terms. Owen stood near the back entrance, wearing the only button-down shirt he owned. Priya stood beside him, tablet in hand, checking the file one last time. May had arrived early and positioned herself near the sound booth, chatting with the AV tech like they were old friends. Theo crouched behind a planter with his laptop, waiting for the signal. Lita moved through the crowd like she belonged there, stopping to greet people, shaking hands, easing toward the front where the speeches would be held. Celia sat at a table near the stage, her box of documents resting at her feet like a loaded gun. At 8 o'clock sharp, the MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Before dinner, we'd like to recognize our sponsors, beginning with Stroud Ag and Loan, a partner in growth for over 90 years. Applause rippled politely through the room. Caleb Stroud walked to the podium, smile fixed, hands relaxed. He began his speech with a joke about grain prices and a nod to tradition. The crowd chuckled in the right places. May caught the AV tech's eye and nodded. The tech frowned, glanced at his board, then shrugged and flipped a switch. The glossy wheat fields vanished from the screens. In their place, a new image appeared. The coded ledger, pages scanned and magnified, names and dates highlighted in red. Caleb faltered mid-sentence. His smile held, but his eyes flicked toward the screens, confusion, then recognition, then something colder. Priya's voice came through the speakers, calm and clinical. This is a purchasing ledger from Stroud Grain and Loan, 1924 to 1989. Each entry corresponds to a land seizure following either a contaminated grain claim or a silo explosion. Cross-referenced with county records, the pattern is unmistakable. The second screen lit up. May's co-op logs side by side with the ledger codes. Elevator tickets, railcar IDs, dates of foreclosure. The matches were perfect, line after line. The third screen showed the body cam footage. Hank Dole on the catwalk, lighter in hand, accelerant glistening. Pike's voice reading rights. The fuel can, the cut wire. The arrest, the room went silent. Not polite silence, shocked silence. Owen walked to the front, taking the microphone from the MC's hand without asking. His voice came out steady, louder than he'd expected. For 100 years, Stroud Ag and Loan has built its empire on theft, poisoned grain, rigged explosions. Foreclosures timed to desperation. My father lost his land the same way. So did Celia Reyes's family. So did dozens of others in this room. He held up the invoice stub, turning it so the cameras could see. This is from 3 months ago. Sterile 9 seed distributed through a Stroud subsidiary designed to collapse soil microbiomes and lock farmers into a single supply chain. It's the same play, just updated for patents instead of explosions. Priya stepped beside him, holding the soil trays. This is what Sterile 9 does. On the left, healthy soil. On the right, biological death. Any farmer who plants this seed will lose their autonomy.